Hello YouTube. This video is primarily addressed to the organization called TheHittingStopsHere. It is an organization that is dedicated to abolishing corporal punishment in schools throughout this country. Corporal punishment, or paddling as it's sometimes called, is where in schools where educators can hit students with a wooden board called a paddle. The paddle, which started out for use on slaves, which was sometimes favored over the bullwhip, because it wasn't as likely to create scars or do any other such damage, which would have lowered the market value of the slave. And so that's how the paddle started out, as a tool of abuse, and still is used for abuse to this very day. There's some 20 states in this country that still allow paddling in schools by law. Now, I am aware that there was some bill that they were trying to pass through Congress which would have banned paddling throughout the country. Unfortunately, it did not pass through. There was not enough Congress members who approved of it. And so now it'll be, from what I understand, at least a year before we can try again with that. Also, I'm aware that in the state of Texas, apparently they're trying to ban it. But I don't really have high hopes. After all, Texas is not all that youth-friendly, and if you ask me, I would say that Texas is the worst state in terms of paddling. No, they are not number one on the list as far as states that paddle the most. From what I do know about the frequency of paddling, that the states that paddle the most would be Arkansas and Mississippi. They go like this as to which one is number one. Next would be Tennessee, and then there's one or two other states, and then would be Texas. So Texas would be number 5 or number 6 on the list. So why am I saying that Texas is the worst? Well, from what I know about Texas, the reason as to why they're not number 1 is because in Texas they won't always paddle elementary school students. Yes, elementary school students do sometimes get paddled in Texas, but from what I do know is that they will sometimes wait until junior high before they start paddling in Texas and continue on through high school. And that's what makes Texas the worst, because that's when paddling should stop, not start. And that's if corporal punishment is even used in school in the first place, which it shouldn't be at all. At any age, at any grade, it shouldn't be used at all in schools. I do think it would be great to pass laws against this, particularly in Texas, or to get this bill passed that would ban it throughout the country. But I think more importantly, if we want to stop paddling, it starts with the students. It's really up to the students to not allow themselves to be paddled. After all, just because something's against the law doesn't mean people don't do it. Murder is very much against the law, and people get murdered every day. So we have to teach students how to avoid to be victims. Now, unfortunately, we've got some hard obstacles to overcome. There are some arguments that are in favor of paddling, even among high school students. One of the main arguments, for what I hear from high school students, is that paddling, from what I understand about paddling in high schools, it is often not mandatory, but it's offered as a choice between some other alternative form of punishment, such as detention or suspension. And a lot of high school students, they would choose to get paddled because that you get over with in a matter of seconds, as opposed to having to spend a Friday evening or a Saturday in detention when you could be out with friends, or a whole 3 days in suspension. You know, it's the idea of getting it over with much quicker. Well, by that same train of thought, let's say that a school offered you the choice of being raped as punishment or choosing a detention or suspension. With those same students, would they choose to get raped? After all, that you get over with much quicker than a detention or suspension. You know, same train of thought, same idea, getting it over with quicker. You know, just because you can get something over with quicker doesn't mean it's the better choice. So we should teach students, particularly high school students, you know, teenagers specifically, they don't need to allow themselves to be paddled. From what I do know about the paddling, that you go to the office to get paddled. A high school student could simply not show up at the office. They could walk away from the school. You know, that's what we need to teach high school students, to not allow themselves to be victims, to not allow people to paddle them. While I do think it would be great to outlaw this, if high school students simply would never let anybody paddle them, it would never be done, in which case it wouldn't really even matter if it's against the law or not. Although, like I said, yes, I would by all means like to see it outlawed. And so that's the thing to do. We teach students not to be victims. Just like with rape and murder, which we teach people not to allow themselves to be victims with that. We teach self-defense and so forth, and how to avoid being murdered and where not to go. I mean, those things which are against the law, which I'm glad those things are against the law, but we still need to teach people how to avoid being victims. That's the same thing with paddling. We need to teach students not to let anybody paddle them. Tell them to, leave the classroom, leave the school. Just don't cooperate when somebody tries to paddle you. And besides, a big teenager in high school might be just as big as the educator, if not bigger. If they don't let them paddle them, how are they going to do it? There's this old saying, if you don't have a gun, you're not going to shoot anybody. If you're not physically able to, and if somebody won't let you paddle them, you're not going to be paddling them. So that's what it really comes down to, students not allowing themselves to be paddled. That way, it simply won't be done. And it really wouldn't matter if it's against the law or not, although, yes, I would like to see it outlawed, but I really think that's the important thing to do. We need to teach students how to not be victims, how to avoid paddlings, as some people like to say, just don't get in trouble in the first place, right? Well, yes, but from what I know about paddling, that people are sometimes paddled for such minor infractions, such as being late to class, or chewing gum during a break period, or wearing a dress to school that's not cut low enough and is not cut below the knees. Everybody's late to class sometime, even the best of us. And I think that if a student's late to class, they should just take the natural consequences. You miss part of the class, you don't learn the materials well, and you most likely don't get as high a grade. So that's what should be done in terms of being late to class. You take the natural consequences. Don't let somebody paddle you over that, or for anything else for that matter. So that's the bottom line. Just teach students not to be victims. Teach them to not cooperate. Don't let anybody paddle you. Don't show up. Don't go to the office. Don't show up. Don't walk with the teacher out into the hallway. Walk away. Leave the school. That's what it comes down to. Students, it's really up to the students. It's up to the high school, particularly high school students. It's up to them if they don't want to be paddled. They just don't have to allow it. That's what we need to emphasize. That's what we need to teach them. That's the real way, if you ask me, to end paddling. Aside from having it outlawed, which would be great, we should also just simply teach students to not allow it.